We are back for the Thousand Worlds Book Club, and we're still talking about Dying of the Light. Last time we went through the first 5 chapters and found a remarkable number of similarities between Dying of the Light and Ice and Fire, despite Dying of the Light being written 40 years ago. In this part, we're going to focus on chapters 6 through 11. So where exactly are we in the plot? Well, if I recall correctly, Ned Stark headed off to the planet Croyane to meet his ex-lover Ashara Dane because a piece of weirwood was sent to him with the memory of a promise he made. On Croyane, he finds that Ashara is working as an ecologist with Varys, and now she's in a 3-way marriage with Rhaegar and Jon Connington. We also got a whole lot of exposition about Rhaegar's people and the history of planet Casterly Rock, after it was attacked by the Children of the Forest. In the aftermath, Rhaegar's people developed the ability to warg flying direwolves and took them on as a sigil. Anyway, we find out that Croyane is filled with space boltons who look like Targaryens, who like to hunt and skin people. And so Rhaegar's been handing out brooch sigils to declare them as property in order to save them. Meanwhile, Ned is super confused about his relationship with Ashara and whether she's happy with Rhaegar, and Varys, or maybe it's Littlefinger, keeps making him more confused with his manipulation. After getting slipped some sweet sleep, Ned oversleeps and wakes up late and finds Ashara gone, so he panics and tries to steal the Hound's car. But the Hound and his much older husband catch him in the act. And so now we come to Chapter 6. Chapter 6 is an odd little chapter, as Dirk spends it initially panicked as he's caught stealing a car, and then transitions to examining and analyzing his Braith captors, Breton and Chell. The two are an odd couple, as there is quite an age difference between them. Additionally, Breton, the younger one, has half his face burned off like the Hound, and keeps a glowstone eye in it, which is compared to obsidian at one point, like Euron and Crowfoot Umber's eye. Dirk's deep analysis of his captors causes him to pity them a bit. He sees them as sad extremist posers who so desperately want to seem manly and scary, and who don't fit in anymore because their culture is dying. Jan and Garst then show up and try to honorably get Dirk out of the whole thing, but in the end, Dirk has to fight Breton one-on-one in a blade duel. And then that duel will be followed up in a 2-on-2 pistol duel between Jan and Garst, and Breton and Chell. Jan and Garst, though, go second, so there's no chance of them saving Dirk's life by killing Breton and Chell. The dialogue of Breton and Chell at the end of Chapter 5 and through Chapter 6 is worth a reread. We are first led to believe that Breton and Chell are both extremists, and that Breton is the more fervid in his beliefs, while Chell is a tired old man. If you finish the book, though, and go back, it turns out Breton is trying to protect Chell. It's Chell that wants to kill Dirk, and it's Breton that warns Chell that if Dirk is Ironjade property, they're gonna have to duel Ironjade, something that would threaten Chell's life. When Jan and Garst arrive, it's Chell that escalates things, not Breton. And when Dirk admits he's not property, it's Breton that wants to duel Dirk, even though it's clearly Chell's issue and Chell's car. The argument then leads to words between Jan and Chell, and that leads to challenge being issued, but it's Breton that butts in and makes it pairs. Jan on his own would clearly kill Chell. Now interestingly, when the fights are being organized and scheduled, they need a judge, and the hermit poet Carrick Redsteel Cavis is mentioned. Gwen has actually already brought him up a couple times in the earlier chapters. He's kind of the Howland Reed of the story. We keep hearing about this fascinating guy, but he's never around. Anyway, the fights are scheduled, and Dirk, Jan, and Garst discuss fighting strategy a bit. Weirdly, Dirk actually finds the whole thing a bit exciting. It's kind of the first time Dirk isn't a mopey sad sack in the story. Whenever Dirk approaches death, he becomes a little more energized. Rage against the dying of the light. Jan also asks the men to be bonded in some sort of honor friendship. Garst and Dirk agree. Chapter 7, though, turns everything on its head. Arkin, Rourke, and Gwen return, and they head to Arkin's place to talk. Arkin essentially tells Dirk that he's an idiot. All of the bond and promise talk is a bunch of suicidal nonsense, and he should run off with Gwen. And Gwen agrees with Arkin. She says she wants to be with Dirk. Now there's a bunch of interesting things about this scene. First of all, we find that Arkin's home is a bit like a control center. It's probably for his work tracking animals, but it shows that he enjoys the role of the all-powerful shut-in, the master observing the pieces of his game. There's also a bunch of symbolism of Arkin being an owl. Arkin sits atop his stool like a bird on a perch, and he wears owl-embroidered clothing. Later, Dirk finds an owl pin of Arkin's. I'm not quite certain why Arkin is an owl. I suppose the owl is associated with wisdom and is also a deadly animal. It may be that the owl is a symbol of the son of the dreamer religion, that is, the religion of physical pacifism and psychological aggression. Remember, your enemy has an enemy. Now there is this weird moment in Chapter 7 where Dirk touches Gwen's armband and is struck with a battery of memories and visions. He sees Jan, Lamia, Gwen in Orgasm, Garce, Breton Braith, and a Bargeman. We will talk a bit about the sci-fi element of memory when we get to story's end. Anyway, Dirk and Gwen decide to flee together, so they fly off to the city of Challenge to hide. They grab a room and try to figure out what to do next, but a ship off-world isn't coming for a couple weeks. Dirk and Gwen then try to distract themselves with the comforts of Challenge by going swimming and experiencing free fall and a bunch of other activities that all sound super fun. But the text is written as if there's no joy in them. I suppose this is to show that the specter of death interferes with the enjoyment of life. They call Arkin to see how the duel went with Jan and find out it didn't happen. Dirk's no-show postponed Jan's fight, and now all the Braiths are hunting Dirk. Jan seemed pretty disappointed with Dirk for breaking their friendship bond. The power then goes off in Challenge, and they realize that the Braiths have arrived. Somehow, the Braiths knew that they went to Challenge. And now, halfway through the story, Chapter 8 begins the action. The Braiths have arrived to hunt Gwen and Dirk, and they figure they need to get out of Challenge, but the Braiths are also hunting the Challenge residents. This makes Dirk and Gwen feel a bit guilty, so they call Jan to tell him to come to Challenge and try to make people corarial. Gwen and Dirk also realize they need to lead the Braiths away to save the Challenge residents. They get into their air car and run down a few Braiths, which makes Dirk sad, but Gwen is creepily rather invigorated by it. Now I will say there is this large tree in Challenge that keeps getting mentioned, and Challenge is later compared to a dying tree by Dirk. I suppose this is a callback to the dying trees in the early chapters. Perhaps the residents of Challenge are like tree spooks, ghosts in the trees. The Braiths would represent the coming of death, I suppose. So in Chapter 9, Gwen and Dirk get on some sky scoots and try to escape Challenge through the subway tunnels. I figure this must be a typo because they only fly 3 kilometers from Challenge before deciding to stop and nap. That's only a 30-minute walk. Maybe George R.R. Martin meant 30 kilometers. Anyway, Dirk sleeps and has some trippy dreams. He dreams of making out with Gwen, and then it turns to Breton, and then it's the Bargeman. I guess we need to talk about this Bargeman. Our story actually opens with Dirk seeing a Bargeman back on Brack, and he keeps seeing this faceless pole boatman throughout the story. He sees him in Lamia when he touches Gwen's armbands, and now in this dream. Of course, the Bargeman invokes Charon from Greek mythology, the boatman that takes one across the river Styx to the underworld when one dies. So I imagine this Bargeman represents Dirk's fear of death. Anyway, Dirk and Gwen are awoken and captured by the Braiths, and Dirk is roughed up a bit. All of the Cavalar gather to try to determine what to do with them. One Cavalar wants to hunt Dirk, but Breton wants to duel him. Meanwhile, the Tane of the man that Gwen killed wants to kill Gwen, but she's Jan's property. The Cavalar argue amongst themselves using ridiculously legalist and religious rhetoric, which in many ways highlights George R.R. Martin's atheism. Jan and Garce arrive, and Jan notes that Gwen is still wearing his armbands and is therefore still his Bethane. He's about to issue challenge to a Braith named Myrek, but then Gwen beats him to the punch and issues challenge herself. Myrek sees this as an insult and attacks Gwen, giving her a concussion. Jan loses it and then kidnaps Gwen and Dirk and rides off. Now it is of note the reasoning for Jan losing it. He didn't get angry that Gwen was hurt in a protectionist sense, like say a parent caring for a child. He lost it because her honor was compromised and the Braith viewed her as inferior. Jan's reasoning was entirely feminist, which all fits with Jan's chosen surname Vickery. The Ari in Vickery comes from Aaron High Glowstone, the martyr feminist hero that Jan admired. Jan is following the path of his hero. So in Chapter 10, Jan, Dirk, and the unconscious Gwen head to Lamia to hide. Jan explains that now he will be hunted by the Braiths too. His life is ruined, as is Garce, his Tane. Dirk tries to sleep, but the music of Lamia makes it very difficult. So Jan heads off to get Arkin, and a whole lot of time is dedicated to describing Dirk's depression. Of course, Lamia had an incredibly high suicide rate, and Dirk nearly loses it. Now, Dirk's weird, depressed self-examination that goes on for pages and pages may seem odd, but you have to remember that George R.R. Martin was into existentialism around this time. We also saw a bunch of existentialism in The House of the Worm. Dirk is having a so-called existential crisis and facing things like the absurdity of the world, a Sartre thing, and Das Nichts, a Heidegger thing. The Bargeman and Breton Braith are essentially the nothingness coming to get Dirk. Anyway, Gwen interrupts Dirk's depression and they have a little sit down. Gwen explains that she only agreed to run away with Dirk because she wanted to save his life. She didn't actually want to be with him. Dirk accepts all that, but is confused. If she didn't want to get back together, then why send him the Whisper Jewel? And now the story gets really turned on its head. She didn't send him the Whisper Jewel. It soon becomes clear that Arkin sent the Whisper Jewel, and he's the one that put it in Dirk's head that Gwen was in danger, and he made Dirk believe that Gwen was being hidden from him, and he drugged Dirk so he would oversleep, while he lied to Gwen and said there was a bug migration to get Gwen out of the house. It's been Arkin that's been puppeteering all of the events of the story. Now, as fun as this grand conspiracy twist is to this story, it's hard to imagine it actually working in reality. It took a rather unrealistic amount of time for Gwen and Dirk to finally talk about the Whisper Jewel, something that probably should have happened way early. And the fact that Gwen never asks the simple question, "Why are you here?" is odd. If an ex shows up on your doorstep unannounced, that would be the first question one would ask. But whatever, it's a story. Now, of course, people give me a lot of shit for being a conspiracy theorist with Ice and Fire, but the reason I do this is that conspiracies and puppet mastering are the go-to themes for George R.R. Martin. Nearly all of the stories we've read so far have involved these. And in Ice and Fire, we essentially know that Littlefinger, Varys, Doran, the Faceless Men, the Maesters, and Bloodraven exist and are each conspiring. The only question is, to what extent? Anyway, Chapter 11 has Dirk heading back to Lartane to find Jan, who hasn't returned to Crine Lamia. Dirk searches for Jan and Arkin, but can't find them. It appears Jan has been lured back to the area by Arkin to be hunted by the Braith. Dirk then decides to wear his Whisper Jewel with the memory of Jenny full-time around his neck. If you remember in Night Flyers, Melantha Jurl does the same thing with hers, but hers, of course, was the memory of an orgasm. Anyway, Dirk finds Garce passed out drunk, and it's very clear he's been going through some shit. Dirk wakes him up and convinces him that regardless of Jan's actions, Garce is still Jan's Tane and obligated to him. This very much gets into the reoccurring Martin story theme of obligation to an ex. Now, I've put some time into thinking about what George R. R. Martin actually believes with regards to philosophy, or at least what he believes in this story. I would guess that he's a fan of existentialists like Sartre and Nietzsche, but he also seems to be a fan of duty, so maybe there's a bit of Kant in there. I'm certainly not confident in my assessment, and I may be reading into things, and honestly, in real life, no one is truly consistent or logical in their ethical beliefs. We make things up as we go along. That said, I think George R. R. Martin believes in duty, but not social duty. It's a personal duty and self-actualization. I think he believes in personal individual codes in an existentialist way. Though Martin clearly is also a strong believer in equality and doing good for society as well. I bring this up because it relates back to Dirk and Garce's growth as characters. Dirk and Garce begin tied to other characters, Gwen and Jan, and they begin tied to social ways of thinking, that of Avalon and High Cavalon. But Dirk and Garce are then liberated from their partners and their cultures. Out on Warlorn, without law or religion or social norms, they are left with nothing but their own personal codes. Dirk says, "Gwen broke all the bonds between us years ago, but I came when she needed me. Oh, it turned out she didn't really need me, and I came for a lot of selfish reasons, but I came. You can't rob me of that, Garce. I kept my promise." Dirk has no religion to bind him, nor a culture, nor law, nor even Gwen. He just has himself and his code. And I think this sums up George R. R. Martin's reoccurring theme about obligation to exes. Promise isn't social or religious or dependent on reciprocity. It's a personal code. And Martin is saying love for someone else, even if unrequited, perhaps especially if unrequited, is a fulfillment of a personal code, a fulfillment of a promise. Or something, I don't know, whatever. Anyway, Dirk's speech totally works on Garce, and we get a sense that Garce doesn't just love Jan as a partner or a friend, but he loves him romantically. This, of course, makes Garce almost the exact same character as John Connington in both physical appearance and personality. Well, Garce may have a better sense of humor. And so our chapter ends with Garce and Dirk deciding they need to rescue Jan. But then Garce snatches a laser and says he will hand over Dirk to the Braiths. And that's it for part 2 of the story. We'll finish off Dying of the Light and get into some deeper insight in part 3. See you then.